and the family was in Tyler for no reason he could now recall. He put down a nickel at the booth out front of the Rose. The painted woman behind the glass smiled at him, her mouth moving for chewing gum, her hair black as India ink, bobbed just beneath her ears in the way his mama said was sin. "Baby doll," she said, "you sure you're man enough to watch a flicker like this one?" And blew a bubble, popped it. Earl had shrugged, felt himself blush. He looked behind him a moment, scanned the storefronts and sidewalk for any of his family. This was sin too, he knew, going to a flicker show. A sin 70 times 7 that of chewing gum, even worse than bobbing your hair. This was a strange place, an alien place. A place he'd only heard comment on from his oldest sister, Wilda, too many times at supper. His mama's call to quiet over whether or not she could go see a flicker, always loud and final, no matter the pout and sighs and tears his sister gave. But they wouldn't miss him, not today or any day, unless one or another of his sisters or brothers saw him going in. Then there'd be trouble, the joyful kind only a brother or sister could know for turning in one of their own. The street was empty, save for the parked automobiles, more of them on this stretch of street than there were in the entire town of Hawkins. He turned to her, shrugged again, said, "I am." "Then you are, Shug," she said, and smiled down at him, slipped beneath the glass a red ticket printed with the words, "The Rose." He moved past the booth into the twin glass doors into the place and stepped into a room with polished green stone for a floor, the walls hung with red velvet drapes. On the walls, too, framed signs for flickers, colorful pictures of men and women and jungles and castles and automobiles. And he turned to his left, saw against that wall, back from the door so that he hadn't seen it from outside, a glass counter. Behind it, another woman, this one with the same bob as the woman in the booth, but her hair the red of a rooster's comb. She stood with her hands to the counter, smiling at him, chewing gum herself, and Earl saw beneath the glass counter trays full of penny candies as bright and glorious as jewels. On the counter stood a popcorn machine like he'd seen on the street here in Tyler and sometimes in Mineola, but this one sat right on the counter and not in a wheeled cart. There were white cups made out of paper sitting on the counter too. In them brown water, it looked like, rows of them waiting for whoever would drink the stuff. And he wondered if this were liquor itself, the flicker's such a sinful place they sold it right out in the open, no matter the law. "Son," he heard from behind him, and he turned, saw a man in a white shirt and red vest and black bow tie nod at him, a hand out to Earl. "Your ticket," the man said, and Earl heard behind him a pop of gum, a small laugh, and the man's eyes went quickly behind Earl into the woman Earl knew. The man gave a small smile at her, a small shake of his head, and motioned with his hand for Earl to come to him. Earl thought, of course, that he was in trouble now, that in fact he wasn't man enough to go to a flicker show, or perhaps somehow Wilda or Barney or Chiltern or maybe even Pearl had seen him, had run for Mama, and now he'd have to give the ticket back. Earl moved toward him slowly, the ticket in both hands, fingers holding tight to either end, and now the man gestured again, waved Earl toward him. Behind the man was a doorway in, parted red velvet curtains waiting to give Earl the mystery of this place, the flicker show, and now he might never know. Earl let go the ticket with one hand, held it out to the man who took it, quickly tore it in half, and Earl felt the blood rush to his neck and into his face. Here was humiliation, genuine and full. His ticket, torn in half in front of him, and he looked down. The man held half the ticket out to Earl, and Earl reached for it, took it, his medicine given and taken, and turned to the door, for the world out there already brighter, already harsher for how his eyes had adjusted to here, and to these dark red drapes, these women with sinful hair, these jewels beneath glass. "Son," he heard again, on the word boredom he could hear, and a kind of laughter too, and Earl turned, saw the man in the doorway to the theater itself, there between the parted curtains. "We're going to start in near a minute," he said. "Let's get you a seat now," he said. And it came to him that there was a system to this all, a ritual, he guessed, that involved the man tearing your ticket in two and taking you in. The man had a half smile, his eyes moving quick from Earl to the red-haired woman, who gave out a sharp laugh, said, "Your first time, honey?" Earl looked at her. She was smiling too, had her hands on her hips, the white blouse she had on finer than any of his sisters or even his mama owned, though it was only a blouse, buttons and a collar. But it was made of a material that seemed to shine and seemed to let you see through it all at once. and he thought he might be able to see through the material thin white straps at her shoulder or underclothing. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and looked down, saw his shoes, the worn out of them, the toes muddy and scuffed on this polished green stone. "We still need to get you a seat," the man said, exasperated now. And Earl looked up, saw the man held an arm out into the doorway, and Earl glanced at the woman, said, "Thank you, ma'am," for no reason at all.